Hi, everybody. My name is Richard Boylan, and I work as an agriculture extension agent in Watauga County and Ashe County, North Carolina, in the high country northwestern corner of the state. And I've been a farmer's market grower at times and grown a diversity of crops, but the main crop that I've stuck with over the years is garlic. So I'm real happy to be able to present on garlic today. Let's get started. As I said, I grow garlic on a small operation. Started out with mostly hand tools, and we'll have pictures of the evolution from there into BCS two-wheel tractor type systems. Um, and um, I am I am momentarily figuring out how to advance the slides. There we go. All right. Now that I'm adapted, uh, I recommend that you grow garlic if you love it as a food. If you have a market that loves it as a food or medicine and adaptogen, um, because it's fall planted, you will be busy planting it, perhaps at a time that is otherwise more open in a market gardener's schedule. Uh, Although garlic isn't harvested usually until June or so, June or July, you do get a spring scape harvest if you are growing hardneck varieties of garlic. Um, and those hardneck varieties are considered gourmet, considered uh, better, I think, than what you'd find in a supermarket or imported. And they're not something that most major retailers are able to carry. A lot of people consider garlic an easy crop, and I don't. And you're welcome to think that that means that I'm challenged as a grower, but I tend to think that I like to get into the intricacies and details of a simple crop. So I'll be describing some of the challenges that you may experience if you take on garlic. There are some challenges in the market for garlic because silverskin softneck varieties are pretty amenable to industrial farming and automation. The Chinese imports have crashed the price of garlic in recent decades. So you can go to a grocery store and often find garlic for $2 or $3 a pound, and that is not a price that you would ever want to take as a independent grower. If you're growing hardnecks, you will be doing a lot of hand labor at every stage of the way, and customers may need to understand the difference between your garlic and what they can find at Costco or even Whole Foods. Uh, if the garlic is more expensive than they are used to paying, and they want a full flavor from the garlic that they're buying from you, you're welcome to recommend to them that they add the garlic at the end of cooking. So instead of putting the garlic and onions at the beginning of the saute process, maybe do the onions at the beginning if their recipe calls for it. But put the garlic in at the end to get that full flavor. Just to anchor us in place for me, all of my extension work or most of my extension work and all of my recent farm production has been in the high country between 3 and 4,000 feet. These two pictures are up at the upper end of that range, and you see that the joiners. This is Big Horse Creek Farm in Ashe County, and they actually carved a few terraces specifically for garlic initially, and then other market garden vegetables. And that worked well for them. But the first few years, the dozer work did compact the soil such that there were some disease challenges. So here's sort of example one, and I'll mention this a few times in the presentation of garlic requiring weed free and level ground, but it also has to be well drained. And if there's been a bulldozer recently on it, there probably are some drainage challenges. This is early in my garlic production long ago, and just to show that there's no shame in starting small. I've kept this picture in. I just started asking other neighbors and fellow gardeners what they were having success with, and would buy garlic from them and try it. And if I liked it, then I would plant some of it. And eventually it became a moderately profitable side enterprise for me. So I have stuck with hardnecks, and I'll go through some of those with descriptions and illustrations that I've borrowed from Fillory Farm out in California here. The rocamboles, the purple striped, and the marbled varieties of garlic are three broad categories, and there's a lot of names within each of those categories. They are extremely cold hardy. They're very strongly flavored. A lot of heat or a lot of complexity to the garlic flavor. Reasonably large cloves and quite easily peeled. The purple Italian is one that I grow that you just don't even have to hardly smash it under your hand before the peel is coming away, and you've got access to the clove to cook. And you can see that purple stripes and other hardneck garlics have a single layer of cloves wrapped around this central neck or spine of the plant. So there are no real small cloves. There might be slight variety as they alternate around the neck, but there is not the tiny central cloves that you'll see in the artichokes and softnecks. And you can see that here too. Some diversity in the size of the cloves, but they're all generally large. Uh, Reasons why you wouldn't want to grow the rocamboles, purple stripes, and marbled would be if you're at a real low elevation in the Carolinas or the Southeast. They don't thrive in super warm environments. The bulbs themselves have a shorter storage life, so you want to use them up. In my experience, by December, January, February, maybe, but not too far into the new year after harvest. Um, they do produce a lot of double cloves, which then make a double head of garlic that grows, two heads in the same planting hole. Some people think of that as a disadvantage, and other people, rather like it for green garlic harvests or other situations where the increased number of bulbs harvested per area could be an advantage. They may be somewhat vulnerable to disease. The rocambole that I've stuck with over the years does seem a little more disease vulnerable than some of the porcelains. So moving on to porcelains, they are exceptionally disease resistant. A little milder flavor, very large cloves, excellent storage life. They do adapt to a diversity of climates. I have heard reports of people growing the porcelains in the Midwest, Indiana, down on the Piedmont. I think even on the coastal plain with good success. Um, as you see, there are 4 to maybe 6. Some of the music varieties may go on up to 8 um, cloves per head or bulb. But anytime you're harvesting a 4 clove bulb of garlic, you are going to have to save at least 25% of that to to replant if you want the same number of bulbs the following year. So that can be a disadvantage. Here is the sort of top view of a softneck or artichoke or silverskin variety of garlic, and you see that without a central neck or spine, that there are just cloves all the way in. But as a chef, I find these infuriating, and really have pulled away from growing any soft necks. I grew Inchlium Red until about 2015, and it was a good variety, but we in the high country we would get some cold winters where Inchlium failed to thrive. So I did back away from that. But if you're looking for a soft neck that does have generally large cloves, considerably better than this illustration from Fillory, Inchlium may be worth a look. And as long as you're under 3,500 feet, it could be worth a try here in the southeast. But for the other silver skins, these are the grocery store varieties. Um, they lend themselves to automation because you can plant a clove sideways or even upside down, and it will grow more or less, properly and make a proper looking head. Whereas the hardneck variety would be really distended or lopsided if you planted it sideways. Probably wouldn't survive at all if you planted it upside down. They're good flavored. They do like warm climates. They have a good storage life. You can braid them. Um, uh, yeah, and that's about as much as I can say about it because, like I said, I haven't grown any soft necks in 6 years. I do grow one turban variety still, or and and it can be a soft neck in warm climates. So uh, there are hardneck varieties of garlic that environmental conditions can then push toward being soft neck. If my turbines don't form a scape, I don't worry about it. They still have beautiful bulbs. And then many years they do produce scapes that are also a marketable harvest early on. Um, Good flavor, kind of a small compact plant, an interesting plant to grow. Uh, this is sort of mid or the years maybe 3 or 4 for me as I was growing garlic and other market vegetable crops. So you can see the garlic is in the background here, and I'm preparing beds with the rotary plow in the foreground. Sorry that the rotary plow is out of this picture, but I do throw quite a bit of soil onto the bed to try to get some elevation. This site was less well drained than the site I cultivate now, but even at the new site, I like to build up a bed that's 10 or more inches high. If you have really wonderfully drained soil, then you might not need to be that tall. And I'll have some pictures from other farms later that are doing raised beds of 3 or 4 inches with good success. Because we're in the southeast and a lot of our soils are acid, most of us will lean to lime. Definitely best to soil test. And get your pH above 6, and garlic can generally tolerate a pH even a little above 7, but between 6 and 7 is ideal. If you don't know your soil's nutrient profiles, the sort of minimum fertility for garlic to thrive is about 60 pounds of nitrogen to the acre, 120 pounds of phosphorus, and 180 pounds of potassium. So kind of a 1-2-3 ratio there. I generally run my garlic fields at higher than 60 pounds of nitrogen to the acre. Most of your fertility is going to be applied in the fall. So this is a spring picture, but I want to show you the growth you want to have by March or April, depending on your elevation. And all this growth is going to happen only if the fertility is applied pre-plant in the fall. So you can see here, the leaves are not on the trees yet here in the high country, so that is probably an early April photograph, or maybe mid-April. And for the garlic to get to that size, it was planted the previous fall. Sometimes in October, although I often am delayed until November or December with my schedule. But pre-plant, there is tillage, formation of the raised bed, and additions over the years. Based on soil tests, I have added chicken litter in a pelleted bag form, alfalfa meal, or the pellets that are used as horse feed is a little easier to handle. Bone meal, worm castings that I make myself in a worm bin, kelp meal, mined potassium sulfate, rock phosphate, azomite. And if all this stuff doesn't do quite enough in the fall and I see growth flagging in March and April, then I may a few years come back with sodium nitrate or bulldog soda. Although I've moved away from that recently. I've had good luck with the slow release organic nitrogens from the fall. Early on, I tried to experiment with some cover cropping ahead of garlic. I've moved away from this because it was so labor intensive um, uh, for the planting. But you may want to experiment with some sorghum Sudan grass or millet planted 70 or 80 days before your average first frost date in the fall. You can get some significant biomass grown right in place. But then to work the soil and get it planted, I actually had to cut it and move it off, and it became aggravation. But I'll show you, if you have a system where you can plant right into a cover crop residue, then if you have a nice dense layer like this, where you can't even see the soil beneath the cover crop residue, and you can see that it's been killed by a fall frost at this stage, um, then you might be able to plant straight in there. Most of my ground that you see here, even though I seeded real heavily with cover crop, did allow some fall annual and some perennial weeds to peek up through. So I wound up having to do some tillage ahead of planting to really make it work. And wasn't fond of the results. But if you're at a scale where you can really automate cover cropping, there are options out there. Here's a raised bed with soybeans in the center and sorghum Sudan grass in the aisleways, such that after frost you would have a high nitrogen, easy to work mulch here, and you might be able to sickle bar the side sorghum Sudan grass and have it be your mulch right in place for fall planting. Um, this is ryegrass on the right, so not really suitable for, or cereal rye on the right, not really suitable for garlic planting unless you're able to roll it down and crimp it, um, such that that you've got that dense ground cover. Moving on into planting, you want to plant your garlic after first frost for sure, but ahead of any hard freeze. So for me, that's between October and December. Although a lot of our area here in the high country in 2021 has not experienced a hard frost yet, um, or a first frost, a first killing frost. I've got dahlias in my backyard right now, so definitely not here. Um, I'll show you some different examples of spacing, but in general, your in-row spacing should be somewhere between 5, maybe a maximum of 8 inches, and rows should be about 10 to 18 inches apart, largely depending on soil drainage and fertility, I'd say. And you will put the tip of that garlic, so you're planting it with the pointy tip facing upward because that's your growth stem, and you'll want the tip of that uh, clove of garlic to be at least, I would say at least 2 inches below the soil surface. But there are some guides out there that say 1 to 3 inches, so I'm allowing them to say that here. If you're at 1 inch below ground level, I think you're more vulnerable to frost heave if it gets cold really quickly before your garlic um, can really get some root growth happening. And that is the goal. You want to get root growth happening through the fall, maybe some moderate top growth. If you see green coming up before it gets real cold, that's not a problem. And even if the initial green growth kills back over the winter, that's fine too. The garlic will resprout in the spring, so don't worry about it. But you really don't want much more than 4 to 6 inches of top growth, because the bigger it is, the more likely it is to kill back, and of course, the more energy it had expended in growing that top and then having to do it a second time the following spring. You will want to use the largest and firmest cloves that you find from your planting bulbs. Um, and you don't want to break up those bulbs too much before planting. A lot of guides say to break it up the same day and at a small scale. That works well. Some people like to soak their garlic in a maxi crop or nog kind of seaweed solution or dilute fish emulsion for maybe 12 hours before planting. In that case, you might break it up the day before. And of course, once you get really big, it might have to break up your bulbs a couple of days before they go in the ground. If you do a soak, or even just moderately dampen the cloves before planting, then you can dust them with, a mycorrhizal product or a non-mycorrhizal fungus like trichoderma, marketed as root shield and other biofungicides like that, or glyocladium now being sold as soil guard or pre-stop, and so on. And by the way, all the products I'm mentioning here are either OMRI listed or on the generic organic list. There are guides out there that recommend planting closer than I do, and one of them, an excellent resource that has been in print now for many decades is the Grow Biointensive publications by John Jevons. Um, I got to visit his farm years ago. This is Willits, California, and he does an amazing job. But the close planting, the 2-inch in row planting, I think he's planting on a 2-inch by maybe 4-inch grid in this picture. Um, First of all, there's no way that you're gonna grow 2 to 3 inch bulbs like our market wants, particularly for replanting um, in a density like that. And second of all, there's uh, a lot of disease here in the southeast. In the humid southeast, we cannot play this fast and loose with planting density. Um, the American Phytopathological Society has this ancient MS Paint illustration that I'm borrowing, but this just shows an example of how 8 or more uh, garlic bulbs can get infected from a single sclerotium of the white rot fungal disease, Sclerotium cepivorum. Um, Really, if you're planting at the density that John Jevons recommends, then disease, not only sclerotium but fusarium and several of the others that I'm going to go through can really just rip through your garlic patch. So I would recommend a 4-inch, 4 to 8 inch in row spacing and a 10 to 18 inch um, row uh, row middle. Some people do still plant garlic for cultivation. Here's a 2-row setup that Against the Grain was doing for a few years here in the high country. They've actually moved to a more of a traditional bed planting system now. But for a few years, they were cultivating the garlic with their farm tractor setup. Um, and had reasonably good success from that, but have found that the bed planting system that I describe in most of the other slides gave them bigger and higher quality bulbs, I believe. This is the patch that I'm currently growing at, and I'm still pretty low on the mechanization. You can see the BCS in the background for soil prep, but because this is just a giant rock pile, it's well drained and fertile soil, but gosh, it's rocky. So I'm still using a drill and bulb planter to make my grid, and I'm using a hog panel as the guidance here. So that I get a 6 by 10 inch spacing by planting in every rectangle along a row, skipping a rectangle, and then doing another rectangle beyond. Um, and That 6 by 10 inch spacing is good enough to grow a 2+ inch bulb across. Once your garlic is in the ground, you will need to mulch with something. And these days, there are growers using plastic mulches with good success. And I'll show some pictures of that in a little while. Here you can see that just leaves, collected from the neighborhoods, um, was a successful mulch one year. These days, I mostly use wood chips. Here's another grid or bed prep and then grid formation. You can see that people make their own dibblers with dowels and just other basic wood, and then dibble every 6 inches across the bed. Um, and that's working well for these folks in Ontario, Canada. I have stolen these pictures off Facebook. And another Facebook friend that I really look to for guidance on garlic is Howard Prosick in Putney, Vermont. And he really has automated hardneck garlic, I think, as far as a small farm can go. You can see that he's growing some impressive bulbs that, if 2 inches is considered sort of the minimum for seed quality garlic, for planting quality garlic, he's got some at 2.5 inches or more. And he's managing to do that with black plastic on a raised bed, holes dibbled, just with a walking dibbler. And then this is his onion field on the right. Um, but you can see that he's got the white plastic for the onions, and then in the row middles, he has laid down landscape fabric. So he essentially has a completely weed-free um, production field from the outset. Maybe a little hand weeding in the holes that he's made, but really negligible compared to even the best of the organic mulches. So maybe someday I'll move toward that. But right now, I'm still doing organic mulches. This isn't a garlic field, but just to show you another example of a tractor pulled but homemade dibbler here, and the grid formation that it allows. I used to use straw. I used to buy a lot of straw. It's easy to apply by hand. It's a very effective weed barrier. It's good for soils in the medium to long run. You don't even have to wait that long for straw to be adding to soil biology. But it's real expensive to buy here in the Carolinas. It often contains weed seeds, and particularly wheat and other grass weeds that look a lot like garlic early on can make cultivation and weed control difficult. Um, Straw can, at the density to block weeds, straw can be dense enough to also block the garlic from emerging from the ground. So you may have to pull it back by hand early in the spring and find your garlic sprouts. If it's put down dry and you don't get a rain soon enough, then your straw can blow away on you. So that's a concern. Um, a lot of you probably are already familiar with the herbicide carryover issues that some straw and hay mulches can carry, where grazon and other um, broadleaf herbicides survive. The aminopyralids survive the baling, and they're in the straw. Garlic is not vulnerable to those herbicides, but it still would be considered a violation of organic uh, uh, certification, I think, for most certifiers if you put down herbicide laced straw and it was detected somehow. Um, but again, garlic doesn't really care that there's aminopyralid because it's a monocot, and uh, yeah, I haven't heard of anybody having problems because of that. Um, there are potentially some mite and disease issues also from straw. Um, the same mites that infest wheat can infest garlic, and the same fusarium that infests wheat and other grains can infest garlic. So the main reason that I've moved away from straw, I guess everything in that disadvantage column is the reason I've moved away from it, but I really don't want to be introducing any more Fusarium culmorum or Fusarium proliferatum, via my mulch. So these days I am using a wood mulch. This may be impractical for growers who have real tight rotations and need to come back and replant in the same beds. But this patch that I lease now, I used to grow as diversified vegetables, and now I have basically 7 raised beds, and I cultivate 1 or 2 of them a year. So the other 5 or 6 can just be cover cropped in weeds, and that mulch degrades back into soil within the time period before I need it again for garlic. um, I'm real fond of hardwood because here in the high country we've got a pretty robust forestry, firewood, and suburban arborist industry, so the wood chips are real available. They're still pretty expensive because they're heavy and you have to pay somebody to truck them for you. Um, but they feed the soils over time. The garlic usually has very little trouble pushing up through in the fall or spring whenever it starts its top growth. And a lot of garden guides and even some farm guides talk about nitrogen tie-up by relatively fresh wood chips, like you see here. But that only becomes an issue if you till the wood chips into the soil. As as a top dressing, I've never had nitrogen tie-up issues from wood mulches, even when they're as fresh as you see in this picture. So once your garlic is planted and mulched, it will actively grow roots at least, and perhaps a bit of a top until the temperature falls below the mid 20s. So your top growth will stop once your air temperature is below the mid 20s. And once it's down in the teens, the top growth may kill back to the ground. But again, that's nothing to worry about. That's fine. And then underground, once the soil falls below the mid 20s, the root growth will stop. And of course, here in the high country, that happens, and things just sit tight for a while. Um, yeah, and if you get that early fall or that mid fall planting, such that you get some rooting happening in the fall, then frost heaves shouldn't push that clove out of the ground. There was a year I tried some living mulches. I tried a crimson clover undersowing in the early spring. This, I think, fall planted garlic with perhaps a mid to late March planting of crimson clover. And I regret to say that that was way more trouble than it was worth. What happened was the clover really took over, and I had to get in here and hand weed. To give the garlic some room, and that was disastrous on the small scale I was doing at the time, and nothing I would want to replicate at any larger scale. But it did make for some beautiful blooms and some happy bees that year. So for other crops, you may want to undersow with crimson clover, but not garlic. Here you see a picture of asparagus harvest in the foreground. So this would have been, mid-April, and the garlic has done a lot of its growth by that time of spring. So you really want lush, dark green, tall garlic plants by mid-spring, and hopefully you don't need to do any spring supplemental fertility. Hopefully your fall nitrogen is adequate, and that's one advantage that organic growers have, is that the slow release nitrogen from feather meal, and bone meal and alfalfa meal and so on, is real gradual and sticks around for the spring. It doesn't wash away. So there are growers who like to go over the top with some fish emulsion, and there's no harm in that, although how much of that reaches the garlic is up for question. Garlic has a real waxy leaf surface, and of course, it's shaped like a blade of grass, so a lot of that's going to run down. But even even if it's not a foliar fertilization, it reaches the soils. So dilute fish emulsion could be plenty of supplemental fertility for the springtime. And if you have concerns, then maybe that would be the window for some sodium nitrate. Still allowed at about 20% of your total nitrogen budget for organic production, um, and if you're going to use that 20% allowance, then late March, or if you're down in the Piedmont, perhaps early March might be the window to apply it. Um, and then once you get it, deep into spring, at this stage where you see it's mid asparagus season, there's some asparagus ferning out already. So again, I think this is late April here in the high country, and that would be too late to add more nitrogen. So it was encouraging to see the garlic have reached that size, because at this point, it's sort of make it or break it. This grower had a little more trouble. This was May. This was an early May photograph at a lower elevation. I think this was outside of Asheville, and you see the garlic barely reaches up to his knees, and that's just not enough. There was no juicing the garlic at this stage. He was going to harvest in a few weeks, and they were small bulbs. So in the springtime, you definitely want to control weeds, because garlic is not competitive. All allium species are not competitive with weeds. They really need human beings to do their weed control for them. Um, you perhaps would put down a preventive fungicide like C's, Serenade, Regalia, Double Nickel, in March or April. Um, uh, you could mix them with the fish emulsion application if the label allows. And then the thing that I really do consistently is try to control black onion flies. I'll show a picture of them in a moment, but they have been a consistent problem for me here in the high country. We do have the wild garlic, the little onion grass, and I think they do feed on that. So they're ubiquitous and endemic in our area. So I tried to skip a few years because beneficial nematodes are expensive, but these days I buy a high rate of Steinernema feltiae, and I put them over the top of the garlic plants after the danger of hard ground freezes have passed. So I don't wait until the last frost, but sometime in April or occasionally very early May, I'm applying those Steinernema nematodes. Um, Arbico and some of the other vendors say that they can survive in soil temperatures of the 40s. I really like to see um, the soil break a 50-degree Fahrenheit threshold before I spend the money on those expensive nematodes. I've been fortunate not to have a big problem with thrips, but they can be a springtime pest too. This is an onion photograph that I pulled from online, I believe. Um, and in the organic world, Entrust is the main thrips control. Hopefully, just one or two applications would be sufficient if you have a big thrips issue. There's another insect pest out there called the allium leaf miner. It's in the northeastern U.S. It came over from Europe. You can find it from Maine down through New York and Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. And so far, it has not reached the Carolinas. Let's hope it never does, because they have to net, insect netting, Protect Net or something similar over their garlic all spring long to manage that allium leaf miner. Back to the fly pest that we do have, the black onion fly you see on the left, a picture winged fly, really elegant looking insect, but causes some problems. The black onion fly definitely does feed on garlic. Most guides say that the onion maggot, which looks more like a housefly to me as a non-entomologist, the onion maggot supposedly does not infest garlic. And growers who I've been in touch with who have incubated the pupa who look like this out of infested cloves that they found in their harvests have all hatched the black onion fly and not the onion maggot. I mentioned the onion maggot, because at the larva and pupa stage, you can't tell the difference between these two. I don't think even an entomologist could. Um, and I do see the adult onion maggot flies on my garlic plants. So whether they're successfully incubating any young is up for question, but they're definitely around and they're definitely trying to lay eggs on my garlic. And then at the same time, the black onion flies are. And if you let these guys go, the larva tunnel into, in this case, an onion in this picture. But it does the same thing to garlic. And then as the larva feed on the interior of the garlic clove, it just collapses and of course is unmarketable. People don't want to find worms in their expensive garlic. So those are the main insect pests. So I'll move to diseases, which are a little more of a challenge here in the southeast. Um, Here's one of the types of fusarium that does infest garlic. And again, one of the reasons why I'm not using straw anymore, because that can vector this. But this is the basal rot of garlic bulbs. And it's worse in the heat. So Piedmont growers and coastal plain growers, be warned. It does produce this characteristic reddening of the stems. And this would be something that you wouldn't expect. Most garlic stems are pretty whitish and greenish, so the red is something you might want on your finished bulbs, but not during the growing season like this. Anytime you see leaf flagging, early yellowing, especially at this stage before bulbing, you should investigate why that is happening. Rogue out the plants, and Yeah, we'll move through. If you do manage to keep it largely at bay until bulb formation, you can see that Fusarium can infest just a clove or two in a bulb, or it can just wipe out the whole bulb when it gets real aggressive. And this is the kind of disease that you probably have in most soils, right? Fusarium is pretty widely distributed. The goal is to have a suppressive soil with good biology, such that the Fusarium spores are in low numbers. Um, and roguing out the infested plants the minute they show any sign of it is part of the strategy. You don't want to let it complete its disease life cycle. Here's another species of Fusarium. This is Fusarium proliferatum, and you see more of like a waxy clove degradation instead of the wholesale, clove collapse that you saw in the earlier bulb pictures. Um, Here's botrytis neck rot, another disease that can produce a reddening at times. You see just a little bit on the right hand here. It does survive in soils via sclerotia, these hard pebble-like fungal uh, spores of sorts, and you really don't want to let the disease progress to this point. So again, the more you can rogue your problematic plants out at this stage or even earlier, the better off you'll be at preventing these sclerotia from being in your soil and infesting future crops. So here again, the botrytis pori, the neck rot, the characteristic reddening, the leaf flagging. This sort of yellowing of the leaf is right and proper at bulb harvest time, but it is not proper here where the bulb hasn't even begun swelling yet. So if you see early flagging or yellowing of leaves, it's time to get those bulbs out of the ground. So here's some of my own scouting. And my favorite time to scout, all throughout the spring, ideally, but when you're getting ready to harvest scape. So here you see the hardneck scape coming up, and you see that I've got some pink and some flagging and some yellowing and some breakage. And any of these signs at the scape harvest stage are reason for me to dig up bulbs these days. So here you see that the top of the plant looks like it's almost ready for harvest, but the bulb is just barely forming below ground. And I didn't even need to look at this bulb, just seeing this many brown and yellow leaves in early or mid May told me that I needed to dig this up. And since I'm an extension agent, I also needed to take a picture of it. A disease of minor concern for the high country, but perhaps more concerning in the Piedmont and coastal plain would be downy mildew. Um, or maybe not. I hope not. But it's pretty minor up here. Although we get enormous other downy mildew pressure on cucurbits and even brassicas and some other species of market garden vegetables. On allium, it hasn't been a big challenge for most of the growers I work with. If you know that you're going to be experiencing downy mildew, I would go ahead and early in the spring, when growth is at 3 to 4 inches above ground, I would start with some preventive biofungicides, some Serenade, double nickel, or cease. And then once you see any sign of downy mildew infestation, Millstop or Cali Green or other bicarbonate type fungicides would probably be warranted. You can also prevent it by planting at wider spacing. The more air circulation between plants, the better off you'll be. So again, that's the reason we can't grow like John Jevons in Willits, California. Penicillium can be an issue, and it's characterized by this real distinctive bluish mold. Um, Usually this is happening from mechanical injury on your planting stock. So you do want to be gentle as you break up your bulbs for planting in the fall. And honestly, you want to handle garlic bulbs like they are tomatoes. Just think of them as very bruisable. They look tougher than a tomato or a strawberry, but the more they bounce off of, wood or rock or steel or the ground, the more that you're going to have problems that look like this later on. So be gentle with your garlic throughout. Um, Penicillium can be worsened in storage. So if you have the ability to store your garlic in a low humidity cooler, at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, that can suppress penicillium rots. Um, and again, yeah, just be gentle with the cloves. Don't leave the broken up cloves sitting around too long before getting them in the ground. And then at harvest, you want to dry down real rapidly, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. Here's one of the big disease problems here in the southeast, but the Sclerotium sempervirus that you saw initially in that MS Paint illustration earlier on. Here it is in the ground, um, and this white rot on the roots. This is not mycorrhiza. The difference between a healthy mycorrhiza and a problematic sclerotium is that the roots themselves will be rotting or decaying or breaking easily in between this white rot fungus. Um, and of course, if there is mycorrhiza around your garlic roots, then the roots in between will be very healthy and vigorous and full and you can also see some sclerotia happening, forming here. They're not fully black yet, but it is well into the stage of forming its storage structure and getting ready to reinfest a future allium crop. So you want to pull problematic plants out of the ground long before they get to this stage. Here's an aerial view of what sclerotium looks like. You can see that it gets started and then does spread from root to root on plants and takes out whole patches. And at this point, you would not want to plant these fields back into allium, even anytime in the next decade. Here are the fully mature sclerotia. You don't want to let disease get to this point. Uh, if you have a lot of this in your soils, you should not come back and plant allium at all. And I haven't experimented with hot water treatments at all on my planting stock of garlic. I feel lucky I haven't needed to. It used to be really challenging to manage hot water temperatures accurately at a home or small farm scale, but these days the sous vide culinary trend, where those in pot heaters for sous vide style cooking, a quality sous vide unit should be able to pretty accurately dial in the temperature of the liquid it's immersed in. So I am hearing from some growers that with a medium to high quality sous vide unit, they are managing hot water treatments for allium and then also for other seed-borne disease issues and other crops. There are some diseases of minor concern, and this is Emboligia skin blotch. It usually is a sign of inadequate curing airflow. So if your garlic has come out of the ground looking healthy and developed these splotches on the skin afterward, then then it largely, probably has was dried in too humid an environment, too close proximity to other bulbs of garlic. Some more fans, some wider spaced hanging area would be warranted. These roots to me don't look super pretty either. This is somebody else's picture. This is from the American Phytopathological Society. So I can't speak to what's going on in those roots, but this is not a super pretty bulb. I'll show you one of my bulbs with a little bit of Emboligia in a little while. But fortunately, that doesn't really go to to the bulb itself, to the cloves. And with Emboligia, I'll go back to that for a second. As long as it hasn't penetrated all the way through the skin, then your main management is to strip away the Emboligia infested skin layers, plant the clove as normal, and just grow and cure better the following year, and it should disappear on you. Garlic is vulnerable to an alternaria purple blotch. I see this occasionally. It has not been a big problem for me. Some of those preventive biofungicides in early spring would probably be adequate management, I would think, for it if it does become a problem for you. If you're not rotating enough, nematodes can be an issue. So I really do like to, to rotate allium crops for at least 4 or 5 years for this reason. Nematodes are not super mobile, so even in my sort of move one bed over, that seems to be adequate rotation. Um, but if you let them build up in soil, you're going to get some real ugly bulbs looking like this, where the nematodes have hollowed it out. You can see they enter through the basal plate, work their way up through the bulb, and there's just nothing marketable at that point. Um, so yeah, long rotations, maybe hot water treatments uh, for your planting stock as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about the scape harvest window and how you can scout these scapes. And honestly, anytime the scape looks off to me now, I just dig the whole bulb. So you see that the leaves on these bulbs were looking real good. The growth was good, lots of vigor. But the minute that the hardneck, the minute that the scape started showing problems, I just dug the whole plant to get them out of the ground. And and sometimes you can see some things that are pretty unusual. It could be that fusarium is causing this pinkish tinge to these roots. But again, above ground, the leaves looked pretty good. There was some minor flagging at scape harvest time. Um, but just the scape sort of tapering down to nothing and dying back was my warning. I dug it out of the ground and realized that that there was some kind of fungal problem happening, and was real glad to get it out. The scape should be a marketable crop for you. You can cut them from real small; they can be 6 inches long, and they won't grow back. They may lengthen a little bit, but they're not going to form a second scape head, so they won't sap much energy. So if your market likes a real tiny and tender scape for stir fries or pesto or what have you, then you can harvest when the scapes are real small. You can also let them go until they begin to curl, or even until they curl more than once. Until they make a full loop. Um, you do want to cut them with clean and sharp pruners, or I like to snap by hand these days, and I like to just go as far down the scape as to where it snaps easily. There's a certain point at this size or larger where it won't want to snap. It's fibrous enough that it would be hard to break by hand. And I've learned that if it's too hard to break by hand, it's too hard and fibrous to eat as food. So I like to just do it by hand. I don't even carry pruners with me anymore when I'm harvesting the scapes. Here you can see a full loop and then some. Um, Again, you're real flexible about the timing of your scape harvest. So the earlier you go, if you harvest scapes at that 6 inch super tender stage, then you will not only have very marketable tender scapes, but you'll have less weight, of course, if you're selling by the pound. But you'll wind up having bigger bulbs. There's that much more energy for the plant to channel into the bulb instead of the scape when you harvest the scape real early. If you let it get to this length or even a little larger, then you're going to have bigger scapes that will weigh more for the scape sales. And you'll have bulbs that have that much more of an extended shelf life. So that's also a real good advantage. So there's almost no wrong window to harvest scapes. The wrong thing is to leave them attached, because they will sap, 20, 30, maybe 40% of the size and weight of your underground bulb. And I can't think of any market where the scapes are as valuable as the bulb. So you really want to get them off, by this stage or sooner, such that the bulb can have better shelf life and larger size. I'm really airing my dirty laundry here, but these were early garlic patches where I let the weeds get away from me, and you can see that grass. This was when I was mulching with straw, and the wheat and other grass weeds were just awful that year. Um, And then I think I was using grass clippings from a bagged mower this year, and the broadleaves got ahead of me. You can see Galansoga and ragweed and pigweed, and this is just awful. And you're not going to get quality bulbs from patches that are this weedy. However, I at least got enough to replant the following year. So just when this happens, keep your head up and try again. Here is when I moved to wood chips, and you can see that there's some minor ragweed and Galansoga on the edges of the beds, maybe a little bit in the row middles, although really just at the front edge, not going down. And to me, this is an acceptable late spring, late May window or quantity of weeds at that point in time. You wouldn't want this many weeds much sooner than late May, but at this point the garlic has put on a lot of size, and one or two more hand pullings or minor cultivations, and the garlic can finish out its bulbing. But garlic really does need that last month, that late May to late June window in my climate, to really put on the size and weight. So you would not want to walk away and not pull these weeds one last time so they don't get any bigger. Here was a pretty clean cultivation year. There's some summer annuals getting started. Garlic is this was not the healthiest garlic crop ever. I did try undersowing the row middles with buckwheat. Perhaps a weed suppression technique in the walkway is nothing you would want to try in the garlic bed itself. As leaves do begin to yellow and flag, you know that you're moving toward harvest. And this picture from the joiners actually is a little late. That you want to pay attention to the color and texture of the leaf, particularly where it joins the stem. And this crop of garlic was getting on toward over mature at this stage. If you do leave it in too long, then you're not going to have intact bulb wrappers below ground. So essentially, every fully green leaf where it joins the so-called stem, there's not a true stem in a garlic plant, or rather, the true stem is down here. But these are bundled leaves up to a certain point. So where the open leaf attaches to the bundled leaves is where you want to pay attention to color. There are a lot of guides out there that tell you to count the number of dead leaves relative to the number of live leaves, and you know that those authors were not writing in the southeast, because here in the humid southeast, a lot of times what happens is the leaf dies and then it decays and shrivels to this yellow and then brown phase, and then it disappears entirely because we are so humid that those leaves become compost before we can even count them. So I only count intact green leaves where they meet the stem, the so-called stem. And I like to start digging at the 5 or more leaves. So if I'm looking at a really rainy forecast, then I might start digging the earliest varieties of garlic when there are still even 7 or 9 intact green leaves meeting the stem. And you can see that there was a lot of mud clinging to my garlic this year. It was pretty wet conditions, so it was time to get this out, even though there were one, two, three, four, five, 6 or more leaves. It still was time to get that out of the ground. I'm still at a small scale, digging fork and towed wagon or wheelbarrow type harvest technology. Larger farms have employed undercutting bars so that they can run the tractor over the bed, sever the roots down below the garlic bulb area, and then just pick them up by hand. And that looks great, but I haven't tried that myself yet. But some of the growers I work with have had good success. Um, there are potato diggers out there that supposedly work well on garlic bulbs. To me, garlic is too valuable to chance to that sort of high impact. So here's another year where the garlic patch did get a little weedy toward the end. I walked away from it probably in the middle of May, and here it is the end of June. You can see a nice buckwheat cover crop for next year's garlic patch. So I licked the weeds the following year a little better. But this year, I had a fair bit of dandelion and false dandelion and some other weeds there. This was back during the straw mulch years. And again, I've had so much more success with wood chip mulch. But a long handled digging fork and a wheelbarrow and some elbow grease, and you can get them out of the ground. You will need to dry them quickly. So this is again back smaller scale, back before I'm all gray as I am now. But for a while I was just using bread racks and laying them down, getting some fans on them. Um, that takes up a lot of garage space, even at that super tiny scale. Got a little bigger and wound up cutting the stems and trying to dry them vertically. Some people really don't favor this sort of upside down drying because, to the extent that there's any plant sap movement, you're draining sap from the bulb to the stem, and that doesn't do you much good. Um, the other thing is I do like to cut off the roots these days. There are bulb mites that will be living on the roots, and if they find themselves above ground and drying out on the roots, they will crawl their way into the bulb. So you might as well cut those roots off. So that's why I've got my pruners here, working late into the night, hanging out with my snake friend in a shipping container where I was drying for a few years. Um, the shipping containers have hooks way up high, and that was great for string and line, but it was hard to get bundles of garlic over the top, so I wound up using individual clothespins, and that took extra time. These days, I dry in a barn where I can bundle 5 or 7 stems together and hang them over the line much more quickly than you see here. You do want to keep your varieties separate. One year I had supposed help that decided to mix all my varieties up, and that was a considerable setback. This is Rob Danford. He was growing here in the high country for a long time. He's now over in New Zealand, but some of his varieties of garlic are still growing in my patches. You do want to get it clean, for storage. You can see here's just a little bit of amblysia skin blotch again. So this level of sort of minor blackening of the skin is not a concern for me, um, and certainly doesn't affect the bulb growth at all. This was the porcelain. This is one of the two continental or porcelain type garlics I grow. And an excellent, excellent storage life because of those tight skin wrappers that they have. Here again, you see a little bit of amblysia. Again, not problematic, but it does show. Um, I've used laundry bags as storage. I've used paper. I think paper grocery sacks with a fan on the storage area is perfectly adequate for keeping the humidity and temperature, controlled in a storage space. And marketing and sales, of course, is a whole topic of its own. I will just conclude in saying that that garlic has been pretty popular at the farmers market, pretty popular as a value-added product. I've made hot sauces, I've made black garlic. I haven't gotten into dehydrated garlic much, but other growers have done some of that. Even making their own garlic powder out of some of the culls and small bulbs with good success. All those sort of value added options are great. What we don't want to do is try to compete with this level of mechanization. So do try to find the value and the distinctiveness that comes with a a handcrafted and quality garlic product. Good luck, and if people have questions and want to follow up, they are welcome to email me at richard_boylan@ncsu.edu. Thanks for listening.